the secret society of super courts that rule the world. Here is a peek inside the global club of super courts that help corporations and their executives dictate their desiderata to countries around the world. These super courts and the judges arbitrating the cases shape a parallel legal fortress that is largely invisible to the general public but readily accessible to businesses. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, folks, to another edition of Sweetie Kiwi. I hope you are doing fantastic because I am doing marvelous. And if you're doing marvelous as I am, go grab a cup of coffee or tea or vodka and let's roll. Today I want to talk to you about the secret society of super courts that rule the world. Now, this is not anything secret because it's just that they operate largely, in the background, and they are largely invisible to the general public. That's what makes them a secret society here of super courts. Before I quickly get into the nitty-gritty here, let me give a shout out to our millions of viewers and listeners in the United States, particularly Rose Hawkins in Calderville, Michigan, Lane Richardson in Milwaukee, Michigan, and Roy Ware in Ackerman, Michigan. So, what are we talking about here? We're talking about something called ISDS. And what is ISDS goal? Now, ISDS stands for Investor State Dispute Settlements, or sometimes they use another word called Investment Court System. So this is a system through which investors can sue nation states for alleged discriminatory practices, Right? Let me repeat that. So the ICS is a system through which investors can just sue countries for some kind of practices, through whether it is discrimination or whether it is some kind of expropriation, whatever it is, investors can go to the court and sue the country. Now, this is a mechanism that is included in investment and trade agreements worldwide, right? So you have the World Trade Organization actually and the United Nations actually sort of overseeing those trade agreements. And the thing here is that only investors can sue nations. You can't have the opposite. So a country cannot sue investors. All right. So ISDS was originally built as a way to protect investors from arbitrary state abuse, right? Because throughout the world, we have countries that may not have the same legal apparatus as what we have in the States or other countries in the West. So the WT or the World Trade Organization and governments worldwide put this ISDS system in place to protect investors from arbitrary state abuse. Now, the ultimate aim here, the ultimate goal here was to promote foreign investment between state parties. The problem here is that nowadays, a lot of folks in various countries have expressed concerns that ISDS has the potential to reduce social and environmental regulation by allowing corporations to sue governments when such regulation negatively impacts their investments. In other words, if you have a company, let's say in the oil and gas industry, a company that wants to make some kind of long-term investment, a country is in essence incapable of actually blocking it because the oil and gas company can go and sue the country for arbitrary abuse or any kind of legal phrase and word they can come up with, right? So the thing here is that something that was built to protect investors originally may now be used abusively. All right. So now the thing here is that there is something called, another thing you need to know in terms of understanding ISDS goal. ISDS is supposed to be a fair, neutral forum to resolve conflict between countries and the foreign corporations doing business there, right? And there is something called ICSD. It's the International Center for Settlements of Investment Disputes, and this is housed under the World Bank in Washington. And this model is used in most ISDS disputes as the arbitration tribunal. All right, so this is the ISDS goal here. I'll be right back right after this. Welcome back, folks. we were talking earlier about ISDS, the goal of this framework called ISDS, and we kind of understood that it was meant to protect investors against arbitrary state abuse. Now, let's talk now about how does ISDS work in real life. Okay, before I do that, I want to quickly give a shout out. I want to quickly acknowledge some of our viewers and listeners, particularly Leslie Watson in Worland, Missouri, Leighton Mason in Bella Ridge, Missouri, and Brennan Harlow in Tenneville, Missouri. Thank you so much for your support and contribution. I really appreciate that. How does ISDS work? Now, there are a lot of big treaties that govern trade between countries. And those treaties allow corporations to bring ISDS lawsuits against whole nations. And again, as I said earlier, the opposite is not true. So a country cannot sue investors. Now, a panel of 3 so-called arbitrators decides the case. Okay, so the thing is that why 3? So each party to the dispute, so you have the accusing investor and the defendant state, appoints their own arbitrator, right? And both of the parties agree on the 3rd one. Now, the thing here is that the 3 arbitrators, or the 3 judges, if you will, they usually convene in an international arbitration tribunal, arbitration court, if you will, to conduct hearing, right? As I said earlier, you have one under the umbrella of the World Bank in Washington, D.C. Okay, so the thing here is that so those 3 judges meet and they decide on the case. Now, there are a few things to know here, that the investor state disputes are not decided by independent judges, because those judges, they don't have a secure tenure, they don't have a fixed salary, they're not assigned to cases fairly, right? So those arbitrators are usually lawyers who are independent, who are paid per case or by the hour, with a clear incentive to decide in favor of the party that can bring claims in the future, right? The investor, if you think about it. So generally, the same corporate lawyers who argue ISDS cases are also the arbitrators, right? So, in fact, a lawyer might argue a case one day and judge another the next. Think about that. So there is some kind of lack of clarity, lack of transparency, as when it comes to the ISDS, and this is something that needs to be improved in the coming years. Now, another thing you have to understand is that besides the World Bank, beside the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes of the World Bank in DC, you also have something called there are courts that operate under the rules of the United Nations Center for International Trade-Related Arbitration Law, something called UNCITRAL, or at the International Court for the Settlement of Investment Dispute, as I said earlier, the World Bank. So this is very important. Now, one thing that I also want to mention before moving on to the next section here is that the investors right now, as of today, there are no safeguards to prevent the abuse of the system by investors. So you can have investors actually filing what people might qualify as frivolous lawsuits, and countries worldwide have no authority. They have no resort. They cannot fight those lawsuits, but go to court. So they cannot prevent the cases from being filed in the first place. All right. So this is how the ISDS work in real life as of today. I'll be right back right after this. Welcome back, folks, to another edition of Sweetie Kiwi. We're still continuing our conversation about the secret society of super courts that rule the world. If you just joined us, please consider liking this content, share, comment, like it, subscribe, turn on the notification bell so you are notified whenever we drop a new show. Want to quickly give a shout out to all our listeners and viewers in New Hampshire. Hope you're doing fantastic. Particularly Stephen Ward in Milford, New Hampshire, Casey Floyd in Blodgett Lane, that's in New Hampshire, and Mary Locke in Somerville, New Hampshire. Thank you so much. Now, what can an ISDS court do? Okay, now the thing is that an ISDS court can order countries to pay foreign corporations and investors millions or even billions of dollars. And the amounts are so high sometimes that the countries in question, they just find it easier to rewrite their laws to the company's specification, right? Because you have the threat of a lawsuit, you would rather just change the legislation rather than paying those billions of dollars, right? So the thing here is that public money is used to pay ISDS dispute, because if a country is found guilty in an ISDS court, the funds to pay those damages come from public budgets, right? And therefore, in most countries, from taxpayers, right? And now remember, there is no limit as to the cost and duration of a case. So you can have a case lasting for several years or even decades, and in which the legal fees can amount to millions of dollars. All right. Now, one thing you have to understand here is that the number of ISD cases has greatly increased over the past couple of decades. As of today, there are over 1,000 known disputes in addition to the undisclosed ones, according to the World Trade Organization here. Okay, the thing here is that the filing an ISDS lawsuit is not only the purview of big companies, because foreign small and medium-sized companies can also initiate an ISDS dispute, right? Now, granted, they usually don't do these things because the legal fees are humongous, so they could not afford, like a small company could not afford such a huge fee, so they would rather just leave it alone. Now, another thing that I also want to say here is that domestic investors cannot initiate an ISDS dispute. So, for instance, if you are a Chinese investor, you cannot sue your own country through an ISDS court, right? So, ISDS is in the current, I would say, the current framework, the current legal framework. It is a privilege for foreign investors only. All right, so this is very important. Another thing that ISDS court usually preside over, or they arbitrate over, include things like expropriation, and they have another concept called the fair and equitable treatment, the FET. Now, when it comes to expropriation legally is the taking of property without consent, right? So investment treaties and trade agreements make a distinction between indirect expropriation and direct expropriation, right? So, for instance, if you have nationalization, this is a typical form of direct expropriation. So when that happens, usually investors are compensated. So if you have a company, in an oil and gas sector, for instance, and the country wants to nationalize that particular sector, so all companies that operate in that sector, they are expropriated and they will be compensated for their losses. All right. So this is something to know. Now, when it comes to fair and equitable treatment, this is actually a provision that you usually find in trade and investment agreements. And what it does is that it ensures that a company's investment are treated fairly and equitably by the host country, right? So this is it. I'll be right back right after this. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, folks, to another edition of Sweetie Kiwi. I'm still here having a conversation around the secret society of super courts that rule the world. I want to quickly give a shout out to Anya Lawrence in Kapalua, that's the beautiful state of Hawaii. Frankie Guy in Waioka, in the beautiful state of Hawaii. And Kieran Santiago in Wailuku, beautiful state of Hawaii. Thank you so much, Kieran, Frankie, and Anya. Now, let's talk about, can a country appeal an ISDS decision? Now, before I even answer that question, I just want to quote a BuzzFeed news article that said that ISDS has morphed from a rarely used last resort into a powerful tool that corporations brandish ever more frequently. And in practice, this is what a lot of investors, a lot of observers say. Now, can a country appeal an ISDS decision? Not really. because the trade treaties they signed leave them no real option but to follow the arbitrator's orders. Now, if you were to ask the questions, who wins most, investors or state? 37%, according to a UNC-TAD of 2000 UNC-TAD report of 2015. 37% of ISDS decisions have found in favor of the state, 25% in favor of the investor, and 28% have been settled, right? And the remaining cases have been discontinued or led to no damages being awarded. So the thing you have to understand here is that under the ISDS mechanism, states never win. They never win. So at best, they simply avoid losing and are let off with all or part of the legal fees. And this is a huge sum already, right? Now, what if a state doesn't want to pay? A state that doesn't want to pay will face great political, legal, and economic pressure. Now, remember, if you are an investor coming from a big country like the United States and a country that's lost an arbitration, an ISDS arbitration, if that state doesn't want to pay, as an American citizen, you can actually resort to the U.S. government, which in turn will apply pressure to that country. All right, so that's very, very important to know. Now, a lot of observers have asked whether or not you can reform the ISDS system. The thing here is that the ISDS system, the way it is today, cannot be reformed because the entire approach favors corporation at the expense of the states, right? So we talked about some important provisions such as direct expropriation, indirect expropriation, fair and equitable treatment. Those give disproportionate rights to corporations according to several legal experts. All right. Now, of course, the thing here is that you also have a system that incentivizes lawyers to keep going, right? Because the lawyers themselves, they make a lot of money. And as I said earlier, you can have a lawyer who is arguing a case, an ISDS case yesterday, and today he's an arbitrator. So they're actually making money on both sides, right? But I'm not really sort of blaming the lawyers here. I'm just saying that there is a system that should be reformed globally, should be looked at globally, because as it is right now, it tends to favor investors at the expense of countries. I'll be right back right after this. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, folks, to another edition of Speedy Kiwi. We're about to wrap up today's show. Today we talked about the secret society of super courts that rule the world, and want to quickly give a shout out to Julia Hopkins in Torrington, Connecticut, Chris Aguirre, Kensington, Connecticut, and Alvin Pope in New London, Connecticut. So today's conversation was around the secret society of super courts that rule the world. I talked about what is an ISDS goal, how does ISDS work, what can an ISDS court do, and can a country appeal an ISDS decision, right? Now, I really want to give you some kind of a call to action here. Most cases tried in ISDS disputes revolve around international trade and finance law, right? Now, as I said earlier, the legal fees are so huge that they're only affordable to big companies. So if you're a small or if you're a small entrepreneurs, or you own a small or medium-sized businesses, before you think about expanding internationally and investing internationally, it's better to seek the expertise of a lawyer versed in such topics as entity formation, intellectual property protection, international contracts, international real estate, inbound and outbound international business transactions, international debt collection, right? Those are really very important, because should you get in trouble, or should you get into trouble or have some kind of situation overseas, you want to have the right lawyer who can help you, and you want to do this beforehand, before investing. The lawyer can also help you in things like international maritime law, international debt collection, international litigation and alternative dispute resolution, immigration law, international tax law, international employment law, and foreign direct investments. All right, those are very important. All right, thank you so much for your attention today. And remember, stay marvelous.